Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're getting into something that, well, I think a lot of people in academia feel, but maybe don't always say out loud. We're talking about this tendency to judge a book, quite literally, by its cover, or more specifically, by the publisher's name on the spine.
Exactly. It's this idea of packaging over content.
Yeah.
And our source for this deep dive is a really interesting reflection from a PhD sociologist.
Right. And they had this really dismissive encounter right after their first book came out.
Yeah, and the whole issue wasn't about the research itself. It was this unspoken question. Why wasn't this published by a famous university press? As if that alone determined its value.
That's the sting, isn't it? That automatic assumption. So our mission today is to really dig into that belief.
We're going to challenge this idea that books from the biggest, most prestigious university presses, or UPs, are just inherently better.
Does that unwritten rule actually hold up when you look at the history of, truly influential work?
It's a huge conversation. This bias can affect careers, tenure decisions, and even what research you, as a reader, decide is worth your time.
Okay, let's unpack this. Does the stamp on the spine really matter more than the substance inside?
Well, that anecdote is the perfect place to start.
It really is. So you have this new author. They're obviously thrilled. They've just published their first book, a huge milestone.
Yeah, massive amount of work.
And they share the news with a colleague, but instead of, congratulations, they get a question.
Skeptical question.
Did you try to get it published by a famous international university press first? I mean, wow. What a gut punch.
It is. It just dismisses years of work based on an imprint. And the author makes a great point, saying this probably wasn't coming from a place of, malice.
No, probably not intentional.
It was more of an automatic behavior. It's driven by this belief that's just so deeply ingrained in the institution.
So let's define that bias a little more clearly, because, prestigious UPs do have certain advantages.
Oh, for sure. They have a massive reputation.
Okay.
They have what you'd call a greater share of mind. They're the names that pop into your head first. And, of course, they have way more resources.
There's marketing, distribution, all of that.
Right. And that's a real advantage. The problem, the bias is, when you automatically confuse that advantage with a guarantee of inherent quality for every single book they publish.
It's a mental shortcut.
Exactly. You trust the gatekeeper, so you automatically trust everything that comes through the gate.
And the argument we're pulling from the source material is that this shortcut is just, it's fundamentally flawed.
On two different levels, really.
First, it completely overlooks this huge body of incredible, game-changing work that was published by presses outside that elite circle.
And second, it creates this false idea that every single thing a high-profile UP publishes is, an amazing, world-changing masterpiece, which just isn't true.
Right. It lets the packaging define the content before anyone's even read a single page.
So we've got the theory, we've got the anecdote, but I think now we need to get into the proof.
Let's do it. What happens when you actually look at the history? This is where we transition to the hard evidence in the source.
And what's so compelling here is the sheer variety of publishers they looked at.
Yeah.
It's a list of about a dozen presses that are, let's say, definitely not the usual suspects.
So we're talking about places like Viking Press, Les Éditions de Minuit, even the German press, Unrest Verlag. These aren't all cut from the same cloth.
Not at all. They have completely different models, and their status changes over time. You have some, like A.C. McClurg & Co., which was founded way back in 1844 and is now out of business.
Wow.
And then you have others like Harper & Row or Alfred A. Knopf, which were eventually bought up by these huge conglomerates, right? HarperCollins, Penguin Random House.
So they're all over the map. Independent, acquired, defunct.
The only thing they really have in common is that at some point, they were the original publisher for a truly transformative piece of scholarship.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. Because despite all those different histories, they share one thing, one striking point that, honestly, not every famous university press can actually claim.
And that one thing is that they all published authors who became, and still are, these incredibly relevant, influential thinkers.
Their stature just grew over time.
It grew organically,
Yeah.
based entirely on the power of their ideas. It didn't matter if the imprint on that first edition was relatively unknown.
And we're not talking about obscure figures here. These are, some of these are foundational, canonical thinkers.
Absolutely. We're talking about people like Frantz Fanon, his groundbreaking work, Black Skin, White Masks.
Yeah, class.
It was originally published by a small French press, Éditions d'Ussé.
Right.
This wasn't some mainstream institutional book. It was revolutionary thinking, or think about Edward Say. Orientalist
Of course, foundational.
came out through Vintage Books, which is a division of Random House.
And that's such a critical point. These weren't just good books. They literally changed the direction of entire academic fields.
Post-colonial studies, critical race theory, sociology, and they were often tackling subjects that were, maybe a bit too experimental or politically charged for the more conservative vetting process at a big UP.
I see. So there's a risk factor.
A huge one.
Yeah.
And we see other names, too, like Pierre Bourdieu, Simone de Beauvoir, and more recently, scholars like Grada Colomba, Anani Zienyo. Their work proves that powerful ideas will find an audience.
They don't need that stamp of approval to become essential reading.
Not at all.
Okay, let me play devil's advocate for a second here. A smaller press might publish a brilliant book, but doesn't it have less initial reach? Isn't a major UP still better? Because it just gets more eyeballs on the work from day one.
That is a fair question, and it goes back to that resource gap we talked about. So, yes, the initial visibility might be lower,
Right.
but the source points to the ultimate metric of relevance, the one that cuts through any marketing budget.
And that is
The citation count.
the objective indication of impact.
Exactly. The sheer number of citations these works have accumulated, often decades later, is the clearest possible sign of their importance. You have to cite Fanon. You have to cite said.
Their arguments were so essential they overcame any lack of initial marketing push.
The substance completely defeated any perceived limitation of the packaging.
All of this makes that original story, the author being questioned about their publisher, it makes it look almost, well, absurd.
It does. Because today, nobody would seriously dare to question the quality of a work by Fanon or said just because the first edition didn't have a famous university press logo on it.
And that really gets to the core of the argument here.
It's that people are ultimately much more interested in what the authors have to say, their arguments, their theories. Once a work is out there in the world, everything else, including the publisher's brand, it just becomes marginal. It's not that relevant.
You quote the idea, you don't quote the logo.
Precisely.
So if the brand is marginal, what are the things that do determine if a work lasts, if it stays influential?
It's the fundamentals, the intellectual attributes, the work's overall quality, the depth of its critical analysis, the strength of its line of argumentation.
And the source is very clear that these things are absolutely not exclusive to university presses.
Not in the slightest. Any rigorous author working with any rigorous publisher can achieve that.
But what about the argument that the UPs have this ironclad quality control? That their peer review process is just stricter? Isn't that a valid reason to trust them more?
That's the conventional wisdom. It's the safe bet. But if you look closer, smaller independent presses often operate differently.
How so?
They're frequently the ones championing a more experimental or interdisciplinary approach. They're willing to take chances on new ideas or controversial topics that a big, established UP might see as a brand risk.
And that risk-taking is where innovation happens.
Often, yes. And as for quality control, the source is adamant. The peer review process, which is the cornerstone of all academic publishing, is not an exclusivity of the big UPs.
So smaller presses have rigorous peer review too.
They have to. In many ways, they have to be even more rigorous to build and protect their reputation against the giants.
That makes a lot of sense. If you're a small press, you can't afford a single shoddy release. You'd lose all credibility.
Instantly. You have to prove your vetting process is top-notch with every single book.
So what does this all mean? What's the takeaway for you listening or for the whole academic world?
I think it means that if we keep judging work solely by the publisher's brand, we're reinforcing these very limiting stereotypes. It's a prejudicial inversion of attributes.
Judging the container, not the contents.
And in doing that, you devalue the incredible work of scholars who found a rigorous but maybe non-traditional publisher.
It really does sound like an urgent call for more intellectual inclusivity.
It is. The prestigious UPs are, of course, vital to the ecosystem, but we have to stop treating them as the only gatekeepers of quality, the sole source of reliable wisdom.
By challenging that, we can create a more equitable system.
A more inclusive one, yeah.
Yeah.
One that actually values new ideas and critical thinking over just an institutional pedigree. We should be focused on the quality of the scholarship itself.
Which is really the only way to make sure that those truly groundbreaking ideas, especially the ones that challenge the status quo, can find their way into the conversation. So that leaves us with a final provocative thought for you to take with you. The next time you come across a new piece of research, ask yourself this. If you focus only on the publisher's brand, what brilliant ideas, what future influential thinkers are you missing out on? All because their work was released by a small or experimental press that just doesn't have that famous stamp yet. Is your search for wisdom being limited by a logo? Something to think about.